All right, so get this. What if you could, like, train your brain to see, but using sound?
Like some sort of superpower.
Exactly, like a superpower. It sounds like a superhero movie, I know. But
Well, it's...
that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
The world of echolocation.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just how adaptable our brains are, even as adults.
And we've got research to prove it.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're basing this whole deep dive on a study that just came out this year, 2024, in Cerebral Cortex,
Top neuroscience journal.
a top neuroscience journal.
Absolutely.
And basically, they took a team of researchers, and they wanted to see if anyone, blind or sighted, could learn to echolocate,
Yeah.
and what would happen to their brains along the way.
They took a group of 26 people,
Okay.
a mix of blind and sighted folks, and the thing is, all complete beginners to echolocation.
Right, so none of them were like walking in with preternatural bat senses.
Nope.
But after just 10 weeks of training,
Yeah.
they saw significant improvements in all of their participants. It is cool.
It really does kind of challenge that idea that our brains are set in stone after a certain age.
Right, so it's not just about kids soaking stuff up like sponges, us grown-ups. We can still teach our brains new tricks.
Absolutely. Yeah, this study is even more evidence for the amazing plasticity of the adult brain.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this training.
Okay.
What exactly were these folks doing for 10 weeks to hone their echolocation skills?
So picture this. They've got these participants spending 2 to 3 hours each session, really focusing on mastering 3 core echolocation tasks.
That's commitment.
Yeah.
That's like echolocation boot camp.
You could say that
Yeah.
the first task was size discrimination. They had to figure out, okay, how big is this object just based on the echoes bouncing back?
Oh, wow, that's hard enough to judge size by looking at it sometimes.
Yeah.
You know?
Let alone with sound.
With sound, yeah.
Exactly.
I can barely tell if my laundry's folded just by looking at it.
Right.
This seems way more advanced.
And then there's orientation perception. They had to figure out if a piece of wood was vertical or horizontal or at an angle, again, all using just echoes.
It's like an echolocation obstacle course.
Right.
Yeah.
And finally, they had to navigate virtual mazes.
Okay.
But these weren't like your typical video game mazes. These were built from real echolocation recordings.
Whoa. So they're dropped into these soundscapes and they have to use their ears to find their way out.
Exactly. It's like they're learning to see the layout of a space with sound.
Okay, so we've got the training regimen down, but the real mind-blowing stuff comes from looking at what was happening inside their brains during all of this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To see how the brain was adapting to this echolocation training, they used something called fMRI. It's a brain imaging technique that lets us actually see which areas of the brain are active during a certain task.
So it's like taking a peek under the hood to see what's happening as these folks are learning to echolocate.
Precisely. And what they saw was truly remarkable. Remember the visual cortex, the part of the brain that normally processes sight?
Yeah, the part that lets us see the world.
Exactly. Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Even though these participants were blindfolded during these echolocation tasks, they saw increased activity in the visual cortex in both the blind and sighted individuals after the training.
Wait, so the visual cortex was lighting up even though they weren't using their eyes?
Yeah, it's wild, right?
How is that even possible?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
But it does suggest that our brains are way more flexible than we once thought,
Yeah.
even in people who've never had sight. That visual cortex can be repurposed to process information from other senses, like sound.
So it's like the brain is saying, hey, we've got this unused visual processing power. Let's put it to work decoding echoes.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It seems the brain is always looking for ways to adapt and make the most of its resources.
So the visual cortex is getting in on the action.
Yeah.
What about the areas of the brain that usually handle sound? Were they showing any changes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As you might expect, there was a lot of activity in the auditory cortex, particularly on the right side, which specializes in processing detailed sound information.
Okay.
And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Yeah.
For the blind participants, they actually saw an increase in gray matter density in the right auditory cortex after the training.
Hold on. So their brains physically changed as a result of learning to echolocate.
It is wild.
That's wild.
Yeah. Gray matter is basically where all the brain cells or neurons are housed.
Uh-huh.
So this increase in density, that suggests that learning echolocation can actually lead to structural changes in the brain, almost like how exercising a muscle makes it grow.
Okay.
For the sighted participants, they saw similar gray matter increases, but in slightly different areas, kind of near the auditory cortex.
Fascinating. So everyone's brain was adapting, but in slightly different ways, maybe depending on their prior experiences with sound and vision.
Exactly. It seems like there are multiple paths the brain can take to kind of achieve the same goal. But the takeaway is this training was leaving a physical mark on the brain, a testament to its ability to change and rewire itself.
Like the brain is a master sculptor, constantly shaping and reshaping itself in response to new challenges and experiences.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't end there.
Okay.
They saw other areas of the brain showing changes as well.
Like what?
So, for example, they saw increased activity in the superior and inferior parietal lobules, which are these areas linked to attention.
Right.
So they're not just hearing the echoes, they're really starting to pay attention to the subtle details that tell them about their surroundings.
So the brain is becoming a more efficient echolocation machine.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And then there were these changes in the frontal lobe, particularly when participants were listening to echoes. This area is all about planning, decision-making, complex thinking.
So it's not just passively receiving the echo information, it's actively strategizing, planning routes based on those echoes.
Exactly. It's like the brain is saying, okay, I'm getting all this new information from echoes. Now, how do I use this to navigate my world? And that frontal lobe steps up to the plate to figure that out.
This is already blowing my mind, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
I know, right?
Maybe we should take a step back and just recap what we've learned so far.
That's a great idea. So you're using your auditory cortex, obviously, to process the echoes.
Right.
But think about, navigating that maze. You need to plan, you need to remember landmarks, you need to make decisions.
Yeah.
And that's where all that frontal lobe activity we saw comes in.
Okay, so the brain is like a symphony orchestra with different areas working together in concert to create this amazing ability to echolocate.
I like that. It really is. And we've seen how that visual cortex that we traditionally think of as dedicated to sight can actually be recruited to process echoes, highlighting that incredible adaptability of the brain.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about the brain like repurposing itself, like almost like a city adapting its transportation system to accommodate a new mode of travel.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Now, you might be wondering why those blind participants showed those gray matter increases right in the auditory cortex.
Yeah.
While the sighted participants, they had them in those nearby areas.
Yeah, that did stand out to me.
Yeah.
What's the thinking on that?
Well, one possibility is that the blind participants, having relied on their hearing for spatial information for much longer, they already had a more developed auditory cortex to begin with.
Oh, so their brains were already kind of primed for echolocation.
Exactly.
We had a head start.
Exactly. Whereas the sighted participants may have needed to recruit those adjacent areas, those neural neighbors, to help handle this new influx of auditory information. It's like their brains were finding creative workarounds to become echolocation experts.
I love that, the brain figuring out how to get the job done no matter what.
Absolutely.
Like a master problem solver.
Resourceful.
Yeah.
Now, remember how we talked about the researchers looking at 3 different levels of sound processing?
Yes.
Like sound in general, echoes specifically, and then that complex spatial information you get from echoes.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
Yeah.
They were trying to pinpoint what kinds of sounds were activating different parts of the brain.
Right, and they found some really interesting things when they looked at activity in the visual cortex in response to those different sounds.
Okay.
On the right side of the visual cortex.
Yeah.
There wasn't much of a response to any sound before the training, but after training, there was this clear increase in activity, specifically when participants were listening to sounds with echoes.
So the right visual cortex was becoming tuned to echoes, not just any random sound.
Exactly. It's like it was learning to pick out those echoes from the background noise.
Okay.
And on the left side of the visual cortex, they found something even more striking.
Okay.
Before training, basically no activity in response to sounds with or without echoes. But after training, boom, a clear response to those echo-laden sounds emerged.
Wow, that's a dramatic shift.
It is.
It's like the left visual cortex was almost completely silent to those sounds before the training.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, boom, it wakes up and starts processing echo information.
It really highlights how this training was reshaping how the brain responded to these specific types of sounds, almost like it was learning a new language.
It makes me wonder, what exactly is the visual cortex doing in all this? I mean, we know it's usually all about sight.
Yeah.
So how is it contributing to this seeing with sound?
That's a fantastic question, and one that researchers are still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
One possibility is that the visual cortex might be involved in spatial computations,
Okay.
helping the brain construct a spatial map based on that echo information.
Ah, so instead of using light signals to create an image, it's using sound signals to build a sort of internal map of the surroundings.
Precisely, and there's some evidence to support this idea.
Mhm.
For example, other studies have shown that blind echolocation experts, they have this really organized mapping of sound locations in their visual cortex.
Wait, so similar to how the visual cortex in sighted people has the map of the visual field,
Yeah.
blind echolocators have a map of their auditory field in their visual cortex.
That's what the research suggests.
It's like their brains have repurposed that visual map for sound.
It really challenges that traditional view that the visual cortex is only about sight. It seems like it can play a much broader role in spatial processing, regardless of the sensory input.
That is mind-blowing.
Right.
So it's not just that the visual cortex is active.
Yeah.
It's actually organized in a way that reflects the spatial nature of echolocation.
Exactly.
It's like the brain saying, okay, we're not getting visual input here,
Right.
but we can use the same organizational structure to map sound instead.
The brain is incredibly flexible and resourceful.
Yeah.
And remember those other brain areas we talked about, like the parietal lobes and the frontal lobe? Well, when the researchers looked at the whole brain, they saw even more detail about how those areas were involved.
Okay, remind me, what do those areas do again?
So the superior parietal lobule up towards the top of the brain, that plays a big role in attention.
Okay.
And after the training, they found that activity in this area was boosted,
Okay.
particularly when participants were listening to sounds in general, not just echoes.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about paying attention to all those sounds coming in so you can then zero in on the echoes that matter for echolocation.
Exactly. It's like the brain is turning up the volume on all things auditory to support this new skill.
And then there were those increases in frontal lobe activity that we talked about,
Yeah.
specifically when participants were listening to echoes.
Yeah.
And that's because the frontal lobe is the planning and decision-making center.
Right.
It's the part of the brain that's figuring out how to move through space based on the echoes.
Precisely. That frontal lobe is actively strategizing, planning routes,
Yeah.
not just passively processing the sound information.
It's amazing how many different brain areas are involved in making echolocation work.
It really is. It's like this beautifully orchestrated symphony of brain activity with all these different areas working together to create this incredible ability.
But we haven't talked about that one brain region that didn't seem to change much.
Yeah.
The occipital place area, or OPA for short.
Yes, the OPA.
Yeah.
That's a brain region that typically helps us process visual scenes, understand spatial layouts.
Yeah.
They thought they might see changes in the OPA after the training, especially in the blind participants who already use their hearing for spatial awareness.
Yeah.
So why didn't they see any significant changes there?
Yeah.
Well, it's possible that 10 weeks just wasn't enough time for the OPA to get fully recruited for echolocation.
Oh, okay.
They pointed out that in another study they did with expert echolocators, people who had been using it for years,
Yeah.
they did see activity in the OPA during echolocation tasks.
So maybe it takes a lot more time and practice for the brain to really start incorporating the OPA into the echolocation network.
That's a plausible explanation. It could be that the brain initially relies on those more familiar auditory and visual areas
Yeah.
to handle that echo information, and only later, with tons of practice, does it start to recruit more specialized areas like the OPA.
It makes sense. It's like the brain has a plan A and a plan B.
Yeah.
And it only switches to plan B once it's really mastered the skill.
Uh-huh.
This study is just a snapshot in time,
Yeah.
showing us the early stages of that incredible learning process.
Yeah, it is. It's a journey of brain adaptation, and this study gives us a glimpse into how that journey unfolds.
It's incredible, right? We started this deep dive asking if anyone could become a human bat.
Uh-huh.
And the answer seems to be yes.
At least when it comes to echolocation, yeah.
And what's even more amazing is that this transformation is happening inside the brain,
Yeah.
with different areas stepping up to the challenge, rewiring themselves.
Working together in ways we never thought possible.
It really underscores that incredible plasticity of the adult brain.
Yeah.
Its ability to learn, adapt, and find new ways to process information.
We saw how the visual cortex, usually associated with sight, can be recruited to process echoes, highlighting just how flexible our brains really are.
And remember, those gray matter increases. It's like the brain is bulking up its processing power to handle this new skill.
It's like going to the brain gym and giving those neurons a serious workout.
I love that.
Yeah,
And it's not just about individual brain regions working in isolation.
right.
It's about teamwork,
Uh,
about different areas communicating, collaborating to make echolocation a reality.
we saw how the parietal lobes help to focus attention on those crucial echoes,
Right.
while the frontal lobe steps in to plan and strategize, figuring out how to navigate the world using sound.
It's a beautiful example of the brain's ability to orchestrate complex processes, bringing together these different areas to achieve this common goal. Of course, there are still so many questions to answer, like how exactly does the visual cortex contribute to echolocation? And why didn't we see changes in that specialized spatial area, the OPA, after just 10 weeks of training?
Those are mysteries that scientists are still unraveling. But even without all the answers, this study opens up a world of possibilities.
It's like we've just scratched the surface of what the brain is capable of.
Imagine what other hidden talents and sensory experiences we might be able to unlock with the right training and practice.
It's mind-blowing. So the next time you hear the click of a bat in the night, just remember,
Yeah.
you too might have the potential to develop those same incredible sensory abilities.
It's a reminder that our brains are constantly evolving, adapting, and exceeding our expectations.
Yeah.
Who knows what other amazing feats we might be capable of if we just tap into those right neural pathways?
Exactly. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what you think is possible. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those curiosities piqued